It's the late 18th century in France, a time when life for most people is tied to the rhythm of the seasons, the harvest, and the simple act of breaking bread at the table. Bread isn't just food here, it's the heartbeat of survival. For the poor, peasants in the countryside, laborers in the bustling, muddy streets of Paris, bread is what fills bellies, calms crying children, and keeps families going. The scent of freshly baked loaves, crusty and warm, drifts from bakeries, but for many, it's a promise just out of reach. The story starts in the 1780s, in a France that feels like it's teetering on the edge of something vast, though no one quite knows what. The air is heavy with worry. Crops have been failing. Winters are harsh, summers too dry or too wet, and the wheat that makes the flour for bread is scarce. When the harvests falter, flour prices creep up, then spike. A loaf of bread, once a few coins, now costs more than a day's wages for a laborer. Imagine a mother counting her coins, her children tugging at her skirts, the weight of an empty table pressing on her heart. This is the quiet, creeping desperation that sets the stage. By 1789, France is a land of contrasts. In the glittering palace of Versailles, King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette live in a world of silk and chandeliers, far from the gritty reality of the streets. The royal court seems oblivious, or maybe just helpless, as the kingdom's finances crumble. Taxes are high, the treasury is nearly empty, and the government's attempts to fix things, new taxes, borrowing money, only make the poor feel squeezed tighter. Whispers of reform float around, but for most, reform is a distant idea. What matters is bread, or the lack of it. Now, picture Paris in early October 1789. The city is restless, like a pot simmering too long. Women, mothers, market vendors, wives gather in the marketplaces. These aren't revolutionaries with grand speeches. They're ordinary women, tired and angry, their aprons stained, their hands calloused. They've watched prices climb while their pantries empty. Rumors swirl. Bakers are hoarding flour. Nobles are hiding grain to drive up costs. Whether true or not, these stories feel real when hunger gnaws. One morning, a crowd forms, mostly women, their voices rising in a chorus of frustration. Someone shouts about marching to Versailles, to the king himself. The idea catches like a spark in dry grass. The march begins, a slow, determined stream of thousands, women clutching knives, sticks, or whatever they can carry. Some men join, but it's the women who lead, their anger a quiet, steady force. It's a 6-hour walk from Paris to Versailles, through mud and chill autumn air. Imagine their footsteps, heavy but resolute, the murmur of their voices blending with the wind. They aren't chanting for liberty or philosophy. They want bread, they want answers, they want the king to see their hunger. When they reach Versailles, the palace gleams under the fading light, its gates locked. The crowd grows, their demands echoing. Bread, fairness, a king who listens. Some say Marie Antoinette, upon hearing of the bread shortage, flippantly remarked, "Let them eat cake." Historians doubt she ever said it, but the story sticks, a symbol of a court so far removed from the people's pain. The women don't care about rumors now. They're here at the king's doorstep, and they won't leave empty-handed. Night falls, and the crowd camps outside the palace. Tension hums, but there's a strange calm. 2. The calm of people who've walked miles for a purpose. Some guards, sympathetic or scared, let a few women inside. Talks happen, promises are made. The king agrees to release some grain, to lower prices. More importantly, the crowd demands he return to Paris, to live among the people, not in this distant palace. By morning, Louis XVI, Marie Antoinette, and their family are escorted back to the city, the crowd trailing them, a mix of triumph and exhaustion in their steps. This moment, often called the Women's March on Versailles, is one of the Bread Riots' defining chapters. It's not just about bread anymore. It's a signal that the people's voice can shake a king. The royal family moves to the Tuileries Palace in Paris, closer to the pulse of the city, under the watchful eyes of its citizens. Bread prices don't magically drop, but for a moment, the people feel heard. The revolution, already stirring, gains momentum from this march, like a river swelling after rain. The Bread Riots aren't one event, but a thread woven through the revolution's early years. Hunger drives protests again and again, 1789, 1793, 1795, each time with the same quiet, desperate force. Women often lead, their voices carrying the weight of empty kitchens. These aren't battles of swords or cannons, but of survival, of families fighting to eat. The revolution will grow louder, bloodier, with guillotines and grand ideals, but at its heart, it begins here, with the simple, primal need for bread. As the years pass, the revolution reshapes France. Kings fall, republics rise, and bread, though still scarce at times, becomes a symbol of what people can demand when pushed too far. The women of Paris, trudging through the mud to Versailles, don't know they're making history. They just want to feed their children. And in that quiet, determined march, they change the world. The air in Paris, October 1789, still hums with the echo of the Women's March on Versailles. The royal family, King Louis XVI, Queen Marie Antoinette, their children, now live in the Tuileries Palace, a grand but faded relic in the heart of the city. It's not the gleaming Versailles, with its endless gardens and golden halls. Here, the walls feel closer, the streets louder. The king is no longer a distant figure. He's a neighbor, watched by eyes that are hungry, angry, and hopeful all at once. The women who marched have returned to their homes, their market stalls, their cramped rooms, but the hunger that drove them lingers. Bread, that simple staple, remains scarce, and its price still bites. Picture a Parisian morning, the cobblestones slick with mist, the air sharp with autumn's chill. Bakeries open their shutters, but the lines are long, and the loaves are small. A loaf of coarse brown bread, made from rye or barley when wheat is too costly, might cost a laborer's entire daily wage. For a family, it's not enough to go around. Mothers tear bread into tiny pieces, saving the crusts for the youngest, who cry for more. In the marketplaces, women barter, argue, whisper. They talk of flour shortages, of nobles hoarding grain, of bakers cheating the scales. These rumors, true or not, are like sparks in a dry forest, ready to ignite. The Women's March was a spark, but it's not the end of the Bread Riots. Hunger doesn't vanish with one victory, and the revolution is only beginning to stir. Let's drift to the spring of 1793, a few years later, when the air feels heavier, the stakes higher. France is no longer just a kingdom teetering on the edge. It's a republic now, born in blood and hope. Louis XVI is gone, executed by guillotine in January, his head falling to the cheers and gasps of a divided crowd. The revolution has turned radical, with leaders like Robespierre and Danton calling for liberty, equality, and a new world. But for the poor, the sans-culottes, the without-breeches workers of Paris, liberty means little when your stomach is empty. Imagine a market square in Paris, the stalls half empty, the vendors weary. The war with neighboring countries, Austria, Prussia, Britain, drains the nation's resources. Grain is diverted to feed soldiers, leaving less for the city. Bad harvests, endless rain, and inflation make flour a luxury. A loaf that once cost a few sous now demands a handful of assignats, the new paper money that loses value by the day. Women, again, are the heartbeat of the unrest. They gather in the Place de Grève, near the Hôtel de Ville, their voices low but fierce. These are the same women who marched to Versailles, or their sisters, their neighbors. They're not scholars or politicians. They're weavers, laundresses, fishwives, their hands rough from work, their faces lined with worry. One woman, maybe a seamstress named Claire, stands among them. Her story isn't recorded in history books, but she's real in this moment. Her children are thin, her husband away with the army, and the bread she bought yesterday was half sawdust, barely edible. She listens as another woman, older, with a voice like gravel, shouts that the bakers are hiding flour, that the government must act. The crowd swells, their murmurs growing into a chant. Do pain. Do pain. Bread, bread. It's not a demand for power or glory, it's a plea for survival. This time, the riot isn't a march but a storm. The women move from the market to the bakeries, banging on doors, demanding answers. Some shops are looted, sacks of flour dragged into the street, divided among the desperate. The National Guard, meant to keep order, hesitates. Many of the soldiers are from these same streets, their own families hungry. The government, now led by the radical Jacobins, promises to fix the crisis. They introduce the law of the maximum, a rule to cap bread and grain prices, to make food affordable. It sounds like hope, but it's a frail thread. Farmers and merchants, unwilling to sell at low prices, hide their grain or sell it on the black market. The shelves stay empty. Let's pause here, in the quiet chaos of 1793. Picture the city at dusk, the Seine flowing silently, reflecting the last light. The women go home, some with a bit of flour, others with nothing but resolve. They're not heroes in capes or statues. They're ordinary, their courage born of necessity. The Bread Riots of 1793 aren't as famous as the March to Versailles, but they're part of the same thread, a thread of hunger weaving through the revolution. Each riot, each protest, is a reminder that the people's voice can't be ignored, even as the revolution grows louder, messier, bloodier. Now, let's drift to 1795, 2 years later, a time called the Thermidorian Reaction. The radical leaders, Robespierre, Danton, are gone, guillotined in the revolution's own fury. A new government, the Directory, tries to steady the ship, but the economy is a wreck. Inflation spirals, assignats are worthless, and bread is scarcer than ever. The spring of 1795 brings 2 more riots, known as the Germinal and Prairial Uprisings, named for the months in the new revolutionary calendar. Again, women lead, their aprons tied tight, their voices carrying over the cobblestones. Imagine a crowd gathering at dawn, the air damp and cold. This time, the women aren't just asking for bread, they're demanding the government honor the promises of the revolution. They storm the convention, the new parliament, their shouts filling the hall. bread, and the Constitution of 1793. That Constitution, never fully enacted, promised fairness, rights, a better life. The delegates, startled, promise action, but the National Guard moves in, dispersing the crowd. In Prairial, a month later, the protests turn violent. A deputy is killed, his head paraded on a pike. The government cracks down, arresting hundreds, executing leaders. The riots fail to bring bread or change, but they leave a mark, a warning that hunger can't be silenced. As we float through these years, notice the rhythm. The bread riots aren't one moment but a pulse, beating through 1789, 1793, 1795. Each time, it's the same story. Empty tables, rising prices, women's voices rising louder. They don't carry muskets or write manifestos, but their marches, their shouts, shift the revolution's course. They force kings to listen, governments to act, even if the promises, price controls, grain releases, often fall short. The revolution will end, in time, with Napoleon's rise, a new empire, new wars. But the memory of these women, these riots, lingers like the smell of bread in a quiet kitchen. Let's linger here, in the soft glow of history. Picture a Parisian street at night, the lanterns dim, the city settling into uneasy sleep. The women go home, their baskets lighter than they'd hoped, but their spirits unbroken. They'll rise tomorrow, knead dough if they have flour, share what they can. The revolution moves on, but its roots are here, in the hunger and hope of ordinary lives. It's 1795, and Paris feels like a city holding its breath. The Prairial uprising, that desperate spring cry for bread and justice, has been crushed. The Directory, France's new government, rules with a wary hand, trying to balance the demands of a fractured nation. The guillotine's shadow still looms, but the fervor of the revolution's most radical days, when Robespierre's voice thundered and the crowds roared, has cooled into something unsteady, uncertain. Yet for the poor, the laborers, the women who carry their families' hopes in their worn baskets, one truth remains unchanged. Bread is still scarce, still costly, still the center of their world. Imagine a winter morning in Paris, the air sharp and biting, frost clinging to the edges of windows. The Seine flows sluggishly, its surface catching the pale light of dawn. In the narrow streets of the Faubourg Saint-Antoine, where workers and artisans live in cramped, smoky rooms, a woman named Marguerite rises before the sun. She's not a figure from history books, but she's real in this moment. A laundress, perhaps, her hands red from cold water, her back bent from years of labor. Her children sleep on a straw mattress in the corner, their breath soft but their faces too thin. Marguerite counts her coins, a meager handful of assignats, the paper money now worth less than the paper it's printed on. A loaf of bread, small and dense with cheap flour, might cost more than she earns in 2 days. She steps into the street, joining other women heading to the market. Their footsteps are quiet but purposeful, their shawls drawn tight against the chill. The market square is a patchwork of voices, vendors calling out, children darting through the crowd, the low hum of worry. The stalls hold little, a few cabbages, some withered apples, and bread, always bread, but never enough. The price has climbed again, whispered from one woman to another like a shared secret. Marguerite overhears a fishwife, her voice rough as the river's edge, muttering about bakers mixing sawdust into the dough, about merchants hiding grain to sell at higher prices. The rumors spread, each one a spark in the cold air. This is the heartbeat of the bread riots, not one event, but a pulse that beats through the revolution's years. The Great March to Versailles in 1789 was ablaze, a moment etched in memory, but smaller riots, quieter protests, simmer in 1795 and beyond. These aren't always recorded in grand histories. They're the murmurs of the streets, the gatherings of women like Marguerite, who don't dream of power but of a table with enough to share. Let's linger here, in the winter of 1795, as the city teeters between despair and defiance. The Directory, struggling to govern, knows the danger of hunger. They've seen what it can do, how it drove women to Versailles, how it fueled the uprisings of 1793 and 1795. They try to act, setting price controls through the law of the maximum, ordering grain to be distributed. But the law is a frail thing, easily broken. Farmers, unwilling to sell at fixed prices, hide their harvests or smuggle them to black markets. Merchants hoard, waiting for better profits. The bread that reaches Paris is often gray, heavy, barely bread at all. Marguerite, standing in line at a bakery, might clutch a loaf that crumbles like dirt, her heart sinking as she thinks of her children's hungry eyes. One day, the whispers in the market grow louder. A crowd forms, not planned but inevitable, like clouds gathering before a storm. Women mostly, but some men too, carpenters, printers, dockworkers, stand shoulder to shoulder. They don't march to a palace this time. They gather at the steps of the local granary, where rumors say flour is being held back. Their voices rise, not in revolutionary slogans, but in a simple demand. Du pain, pour nos enfants. Bread, for our children. Marguerite is there, her shawl slipping as she raises a fist, her voice joining the chorus. It's not a riot yet, but it could be. The air crackles with possibility. The authorities send guards, their muskets glinting in the weak sunlight. But these guards are men of the people, their own families hungry, their own wives in the crowd. Some lower their weapons, murmuring to the women to go home, to wait for promises that never seem to come. The crowd disperses, some with a sack of flour handed out to quiet them, others with nothing but frustration. Marguerite walks home, her basket empty, but her resolve heavier. She'll try again tomorrow, or the next day, because hunger doesn't rest. Let's drift forward to 1796 as the Directory clings to power. The revolution's fire has dimmed, but the embers of discontent still glow. Bread riots flare in smaller towns now, beyond Paris, in places like Rouen or Lyon, where the same story plays out. Bad harvests, high prices, empty tables. In the countryside, peasants hoard what little grain they have, wary of tax collectors or soldiers demanding supplies for the war. The war, always the war. France fights Austria, Prussia, England, and it pulls grain from the fields to feed armies, leaving villages to starve. The women in these towns, like their sisters in Paris, gather in market squares, their voices echoing the same cry: bread, fairness, survival. Picture a village in Normandy, its stone houses huddled against a gray sky. A woman, perhaps a farmer's widow named Elise, stands with others at the local mill. The miller, they say, is selling flour to merchants who ship it to Paris or abroad, leaving the village with nothing. Elise, her apron patched and faded, speaks softly but firmly, her words carrying the weight of a mother who's watched her children grow weaker. The women don't storm the mill, they're too tired for that, but they block the road, refusing to let carts pass until the miller shares his stock. It's a quiet stand, but it works. A few sacks are handed over, divided among the families. It's not enough, but it's something. These smaller riots, these moments of defiance, are the revolution's heartbeat in its later years. They don't topple governments or end wars, but they keep the people's voice alive. The Directory, weak and divided, can't ignore them entirely. They send out decrees, promising grain, promising reform, but the promises are like smoke, slipping through fingers. The women, the workers, the hungry, they keep pushing, their persistence a slow, steady force, like water wearing down stone. As the century turns, the revolution fades into something new. By 1799, a young general named Napoleon Bonaparte seizes power, promising order, strength, a France reborn. The bread riots don't vanish entirely, but they quiet as Napoleon's government stabilizes prices, rebuilds trade, and fills granaries, at least for a time. The women who marched, who shouted, who stood firm, return to their lives, their names forgotten but their impact woven into the nation's fabric. Marguerite, Elise, the countless others, they're not in the paintings or the proclamations, but they're there, in the bread on the table, in the revolution's enduring echo. Let's linger here in the soft twilight of this history. Imagine a Paris evening, the streets settling, the lanterns casting warm pools of light. The women go home, their baskets a little fuller some days, their hearts a little lighter. The revolution, with all its chaos and dreams, moves on, but its roots are here, in the hunger and hope of ordinary lives. It's the dawn of 1799, and Paris feels like a city caught between endings and beginnings. The Directory, the fragile government that followed the revolution's fiery years, stumbles under the weight of corruption, war, and discontent. The guillotine's blade has slowed, the radical voices of Robespierre and his allies silenced by their own revolution. Yet for the people, the bakers, the seamstresses, the mothers who carried the bread riots through the streets, one truth remains: bread is still the currency of survival. The air in Paris carries the scent of smoke and flour, the sounds of cartwheels and quiet murmurs. The revolution may be cooling, but hunger is a stubborn guest, lingering in the shadows of every home. Imagine a narrow street in the Marais district, where the buildings lean close, their wooden beams weathered by time. A woman named Jean, perhaps a widow who sells herbs in the market, rises in the dim light of morning. Her room is small, the walls damp, but it's home to her and her daughter, a girl of 10 whose eyes are too large for her thin face. Jean counts her coins, assignats, crumpled and nearly worthless, their value eroded by years of inflation. A loaf of bread, coarse and heavy with rye or barley, costs more than she can earn in a day. She wraps her shawl around her shoulders, her breath visible in the chill, and steps into the street, joining the quiet stream of women heading to the market. The market is a patchwork of sounds and smells: vendors hawking turnips, the clatter of wooden clogs on stone, the low hum of worry. Bread stalls draw the longest lines, but the loaves are small, their crusts hard as stone. Jean listens as the women around her whisper, their voices soft but sharp with frustration. The harvests of 1798 were poor, the fields battered by rain and war. Grain is scarce, much of it funneled to the armies fighting France's enemies: Austria, Britain, Prussia. The Directory promises relief, but their words are like the assignats in Jean's pocket: empty, weightless. Rumors swirl, as they always do. Bakers are hoarding flour, merchants are selling grain to foreign markets. The government cares more for power than for the people's hunger. This is the pulse of the Bread Riots, still beating faintly in 1799. The great moments: the Women's March on Versailles in 1789, the uprisings of 1793 and 1795, are memories now, but the need that drove them hasn't faded. The riots of these later years are smaller, less recorded, like ripples after a storm. They happen in bursts, in market squares and outside granaries, led by women like Jean who don't seek revolution but survival. Picture a morning when the whispers in the market grow louder, the crowd thicker. A baker raises his prices again, claiming he has no flour. A woman, her voice raw from shouting, accuses him of hiding sacks in his cellar. The accusation spreads, and soon a dozen women, then 100, gather outside his shop, their demands simple: bread at a fair price. Jean is there, standing near the edge of the crowd, her daughter clinging to her hand. She doesn't shout, but her presence adds to the weight of the moment. The women don't storm the shop, not yet, but their voices are a chorus, steady and unyielding. The baker, nervous, calls for the National Guard, but the soldiers who arrive are locals, their own families hungry. They stand between the crowd and the shop, their muskets lowered, their faces uncertain. A compromise. It's 1796, and France is a land caught between exhaustion and hope. The Directory, the fragile government steering the young republic, clings to power amidst a sea of challenges: war on its borders, division within its ranks, and the ever-present specter of hunger. Paris, with its sprawling streets and crowded tenements, hums with a restless energy, but it's a quieter restlessness now, tempered by years of upheaval. The grand ideals of the revolution, liberty, equality, fraternity, still burn in speeches and pamphlets, but for most, Life is measured in simpler terms: a loaf of bread, a warm hearth, a child's full belly. Imagine a narrow alley in the Latin Quarter where the air smells of wood smoke and damp stone. A woman named Jean, a seamstress with fingers nimble from years of stitching, steps out into the gray dawn. She's not a hero of history, just one of countless faces in the crowd, her life a small but vital thread in the revolution's weave. Her husband, a printer, was taken by the guillotine in the Terror of 1794, accused of some vague disloyalty. Now, Jean sews late into the night, her earnings barely enough for rent and a daily loaf. Her daughter, Sophie, just 7, clings to her skirts, her eyes too large for her thin face. Bread, once a given, is now a daily battle. The market Jean visits is a shadow of what it once was. Stalls are sparse, their offerings meager: a few turnips, a handful of lentils, and bread, always the focus, but small and costly. The assignats in Jean's pocket, the revolution's paper money, are nearly worthless, their value eroded by inflation. A single loaf, gray and heavy with barley or oat flour, costs what would have bought a week's food a decade ago. Jean stands in line, her breath visible in the chilly air, listening to the murmurs around her. Women, their faces etched with worry, swap stories. The harvest was poor again. The war takes all the grain. The bakers are cheating. These whispers, familiar now, are the kindling of the Bread Riots, smoldering even in these quieter years. The riots of 1795, germinal, prairial, have left their mark, a reminder that hunger can spark defiance. But the Directory, wary of more unrest, keeps a tighter grip. Soldiers patrol the markets, their bayonets gleaming, though many are as hungry as the crowds they watch. Jean hears talk of a new protest forming, not in Paris this time, but in the provinces, towns like Amiens or Orleans, where the same hunger gnaws. The women there, like their Parisian sisters, gather in squares, their voices rising in a chorus that echoes 1789's march to Versailles. They demand bread, fair prices, a government that sees their need. Jean listens but stays silent, her thoughts on Sophie, waiting at home. Let's drift to one of these towns, Orleans, along the Loire River, where the water glints like silver under a cloudy sky. It's early 1797, and the town's market is a tense knot of voices. A woman named Anne, a baker's widow, stands among a growing crowd. Her husband died in the war, leaving her to run the bakery alone, but flour is scarce, and the price controls make it impossible to earn a living. She knows the rumors. People say she's hoarding, hiding grain to sell at a profit, but the truth is simpler. There's barely enough flour to keep her ovens warm. And joins the crowd not as a target, but as one of them, her apron dusted with the last of her stock, her own table empty. The women of Orleans, like those in Paris, are driven by necessity. They march to the town hall, their footsteps soft but steady on the cobblestones. They carry no weapons, only their voices and a few makeshift signs, scraps of cloth with words scrawled in charcoal. Pain poor too. Bread for all. The mayor, a nervous man in a threadbare coat, promises to send for grain, to petition Paris for aid. The women wait, their patience thin but unbroken. Some flour is released from a nearby warehouse, enough to quiet the crowd for a day or two. Anne takes her share, a small sack, and returns to her bakery, her hands trembling as she kneads dough for the first time in weeks. Back in Paris, Jean hears of these provincial riots, carried by travelers and news sheets. They're smaller than the great uprisings of the Revolution's peak, but they carry the same weight: a mother's need, a family's hunger. The Directory, stretched thin by war and debt, can't meet every demand. They send soldiers to guard granaries, issue decrees to calm the markets, but the roots of the problem, bad harvests, war, inflation, persist. Jean, stitching by candlelight, wonders if things will ever change. She dreams of a time when bread is just bread, not a symbol of struggle. Let's float forward to 1798 as the revolution's embers cool further. The Directory's grip weakens, and whispers of a new leader, Napoleon Bonaparte, begin to spread. He's a general, a hero to some, a schemer to others, promising order in a chaotic land. The Bread Riots, though fewer now, haven't vanished. In the countryside, peasants clash with merchants over grain, their scythes and pitchforks raised not for revolution but for survival. In cities, women still gather, their protests quieter but no less fierce. The cry for bread is a constant, like the tolling of a bell, reminding the powerful that the people's needs cannot be ignored. Picture a small town in Brittany, its stone walls weathered by sea winds. A woman named Marie, a fishmonger's daughter, leads a group to the local granary. They've heard the owner is selling flour to smugglers, leaving the town to starve. Marie, her hands smelling of salt and brine, speaks with a clarity that cuts through the crowd's murmurs. They don't storm the granary. They sit, blocking the gates, singing old songs to keep their spirits high. The owner, pressured by their resolve, opens the doors, and sacks of flour are shared, a small victory in a long war against want. These moments, scattered across France, are the Bread Riots' final whispers in the revolution's waning years. They don't reshape the nation as the Women's March on Versailles did, but they matter. They're the stubborn pulse of ordinary people, women like Jean and Marie, who refuse to let hunger silence them. When Napoleon takes power in 1799, his new regime brings stability, at least for a time. He reforms the economy, stocks granaries, and eases the worst of the shortages. The riots fade, but their echo lingers, a reminder that power, even in a republic, must answer to the people's needs. Let's rest here, in the soft glow of a new century dawning. Imagine Jean in Paris, kneading dough for a rare, proper loaf, her daughter Sophie smiling at the scent. In Orleans, Anne lights her oven, her bakery alive again. In Brittany, Marie sorts her fish, her heart lighter knowing her town has bread for another day. The revolution, with its dreams and bloodshed, moves into history, but the women who marched, who shouted, who stood firm, they've left their mark, as enduring as the stones of Paris. It's 1799, and France stands at a crossroads. The Directory, the unsteady government that has guided the Republic through its turbulent years, is crumbling under the weight of corruption, war, and discontent. In Paris, the streets are quieter now, but the scars of the revolution, its ideals, its violence, its hunger, run deep. The cry for bread, which sparked marches and riots, has softened but not vanished. For women like Jean in Paris and in Orleans and Marie in Brittany, life remains a daily dance with scarcity. Bread, the heartbeat of their world, is still a treasure, its price a constant worry. Imagine a late autumn evening in Paris, the air crisp, the Seine reflecting the last glimmers of twilight. Jean, the seamstress we met before, sits by a small fire in her tiny room, her daughter Sophie curled beside her. The revolution's grand promises, liberty, equality, feel distant, like words from a faded pamphlet. But Jean doesn't dream of grand ideals. She dreams of a market with full stalls, of a loaf she can buy without counting every coin. Tonight, she has bread, a small, coarse loaf bought with her last assignats. She breaks it carefully, giving Sophie the larger share, the crusty edge her daughter loves. The act is simple, but it carries the weight of years of struggle, of riots and marches that brought the powerful to their knees. Across France, the memory of the Bread Riots lingers like the scent of flour in a bakery. The Women's March on Versailles in 1789, the uprisings of 1793 and 1795, the smaller protests in towns like Orleans and Brittany, they've woven a thread through the revolution, a thread of ordinary voices demanding to be heard. These weren't battles of armies or philosophers. They were battles of mothers, workers, women who stood in muddy streets and cold markets, their voices rising above hunger's ache. As Napoleon Bonaparte, the young general with sharp eyes and sharper ambition, prepares to seize power, he knows this truth: a nation's strength rests on its people's survival. Let's drift to a village in the south, near Aix-en-Provence, where the sun warms the fields even in late autumn. A woman named Claire, a farmer's daughter, tends a small plot of land, her hands calloused from digging in rocky soil. The harvests have been better this year, but not enough to fill every table. Claire remembers the stories her cousin brought from Paris, of women marching, of crowds demanding bread. Here, in her village, the protests were quieter: a gathering at the mill, a plea to the local lord to release grain. Claire was there, her voice soft but firm, standing with other women as they blocked the miller's cart. They won a small victory, a few sacks shared among the families, enough to keep hunger at bay for a week. Now, in 1799, Claire hears whispers of change. Napoleon, fresh from victories in Egypt and Italy, is a name on everyone's lips. Some call him a savior, others a tyrant in waiting. Claire doesn't care for politics. She cares for her field, her family, the bread she bakes in a clay oven. But she feels the shift, like a change in the wind. Napoleon's rise promises order, and with it, the hope of fuller granaries. The Bread Riots, though fading, have left their mark, a lesson that power must answer to the people's needs, or it will falter. In Paris, Napoleon's coup in November 1799, known as the 18th Brumaire, sweeps away the Directory. He becomes First Consul, a title that carries the weight of a king without the crown. The city watches, wary but weary, ready for stability after a decade of chaos. Jean, stitching by her window, hears the news from a neighbor. She doesn't know what it means for her, but she hopes it means cheaper bread, markets that don't empty her purse. Napoleon, for all his ambition, understands this. He knows a hungry nation cannot march to glory. His government moves quickly, reforming taxes, rebuilding trade routes, and securing grain supplies. The black market, where flour was hoarded and sold at cruel prices, is curbed. Bakeries begin to fill, slowly, their shelves offering loaves that are less gray, less heavy with sawdust. Let's linger in a market square in Lyon, spring 1800, where the air smells of blossoms and fresh dough. And the baker's widow from Orleans has traveled here to visit her sister, who runs a small stall selling herbs. The market is livelier than it's been in years, though not abundant. And notices the change: more bread, fewer soldiers watching the crowds. The women around her, their baskets heavier, talk of Napoleon's decrees, of granaries opened, of prices held steady. It's not a miracle, but it's enough to quiet the murmurs of riot. And who once stood with protesters, now needs dough with a lighter heart, her bakery in Orleans humming again. In Brittany, Marie, the fishmonger's daughter, feels the same shift. The granary protests she led are a memory now, softened by time. Her town's market has fish, bread, even a few apples, a luxury she hasn't seen in years. Marie, sorting her catch by the harbor, hums an old song, one the women sang as they blocked the granary gates. Napoleon's name reaches her too, carried by sailors and merchants. She doesn't trust him. Her father taught her to trust no one with too much power, but she trusts the bread in her basket, the weight of it real and reassuring. The Bread Riots, as the new century dawns, fade into the background, their urgency dulled by Napoleon's reforms. But they're not gone entirely. In 1801, a drought in the north sparks a small protest in Rouen, women gathering at the docks to demand grain from passing ships. In 1802, a flood in the Loire Valley brings whispers of unrest, quickly quelled by soldiers and promises of aid. These are not the riots of 1789 or 1795, but they carry the same spirit, a refusal to let hunger win. Napoleon, now emperor by 1804, keeps a close eye on the markets, knowing that bread can topple empires as surely as armies. The women who fueled the riots, Jean, Claire, and Marie, and countless others, carry on, their lives quiet but resilient. They're not in history's pages, not carved in stone, but their footsteps echo in the revolution's legacy. The March to Versailles, the uprisings in Paris, the protests in small towns, they forced kings to listen, governments to act, and a nation to remember that power begins with the people's needs. As Napoleon's empire rises, the cry for bread becomes a whisper, but it's a whisper that never fully fades. Let's rest here, in the soft glow of a new era. Picture Jean in Paris, sharing bread with Sophie, their laughter a small light in the dark. In Aix, Claire tends her fields, the earth warm under her hands. In Lyon and bakes, her oven's heat a promise kept. In Brittany, Marie watches the sea, her basket full for another day. The revolution, with its hunger and hope, settles into memory, a story told by firesides, carried by the wind. It's 1804, and France is no longer the chaotic republic of the Revolution's fevered days. Napoleon Bonaparte, now crowned emperor, rules with a firm hand, his ambition casting a long shadow over Europe. The streets of Paris, once alive with the shouts of women demanding bread, are quieter now, steadied by Napoleon's reforms. Granaries are better stocked, markets fuller, and the price of bread, while still a burden for the poor, is no longer a daily dagger. Yet, for women like Jean, Claire, and Anne-Marie, are threads in this vast tapestry. Life remains a careful balance, each day a small victory over want. Imagine a crisp morning in Paris, the air sharp with the promise of winter. Jean, the seamstress, walks to the market, her daughter Sophie skipping at her side. The cobblestones gleam with frost, and the Seine glints under a pale sun. Jean's basket swings lightly, her coins, now in Napoleon's new francs, more stable than the old assignats, enough for a loaf and perhaps a bit of cheese. The market is busier than it was in the Revolution's darkest years, with vendors calling out their wares. Bread, cabbages, even a few apples, their red skins a rare splash of color. Jean notices the change, a cautious hope in the air. The Bread Riots, those desperate marches and protests, seem distant now, like a story told by an older sister. But Jean remembers the weight of an empty basket, the fire in her chest as she joined the crowds, the echo of Dupain ringing through the streets. Napoleon's empire is a machine of order, built on the lessons of the Revolution. He knows that hunger can spark rebellion, that a nation without bread cannot march to his drum. His government regulates grain, punishes hoarders, and rebuilds trade routes disrupted by war and chaos. Bakeries like the one and runs in Orleans hum with activity. Picture and at dawn, her hands dusted with flour, her oven glowing with heat. The bread she bakes is still simple, rye or barley for the poor, white wheat for those who can afford it, but it's bread, reliable and real. And, who once stood with protesters at the town hall, now serves her neighbors, their faces less pinched than they were in 1795. She doesn't speak of those days, but the memory lives in her steady hands, in the way she gives an extra crust to a child with hungry eyes. In the south, near Aix-en-Provence, Claire tends her small farm, her fields yielding just enough to keep her family fed. The sun is gentler here, warming the earth even as winter looms. Claire, who once blocked a miller's cart with other women, now shares her harvest with her village, trading wheat for milk or cloth. Napoleon's reforms have reached even this corner of France. Tax collectors are less harsh, roads safer for merchants bringing grain. Claire hears talk of the emperor's wars, his conquests in distant lands, but her world is here, in the soil, in the bread she bakes for her children. The riots of the revolution feel like a dream, yet they've shaped her, given her a quiet strength, a knowledge that her voice, joined with others, can shift the world. In Brittany, by the rugged coast, Marie sorts her fish under a sky heavy with clouds. The harbor smells of salt and seaweed, and her hands move deftly, her knife flashing as she prepares her catch. The market in her town is livelier now, with bread more plentiful, thanks to Napoleon's granaries. Marie, who once led women to block a granary's gates, feels a cautious relief. She still sings the old songs, the ones that carried them through those cold, defiant days, but now they're lullabies for her younger siblings, a soft hum as she works. The Bread Riots, for Marie, are a memory of power, the power of women standing together, their voices louder than hunger's ache. Let's drift to 1805, as Napoleon's empire expands, his armies marching across Europe. In France, the home front is calmer, but not without its struggles. A poor harvest in the north sparks whispers of unrest, though not the full-throated riots of the revolution's peak. In a town like Rouen, women gather in the market, their baskets light, their voices low but firm. They don't march or storm granaries, but they petition the mayor, their words sharp with the memory of 1789, 1793, 1795. The mayor, fearing a spark, releases grain from the town's stores, enough to quiet the crowd. These moments are small, fleeting, but they carry the echo of the Bread Riots, a reminder that the people's need for bread is a force no emperor can ignore. Napoleon, for all his grandeur, understands this. He builds monuments, wins battles, but he also watches the markets. His spies report on grain prices, on murmurs in the streets. He knows the revolution began with hunger, with women marching to Versailles, their footsteps shaking a kingdom. In 1806, when a drought threatens the harvest, he orders ships to bring grain from abroad, filling granaries before unrest can grow. The women who once rioted, Jean and Claire, Marie, benefit from this, their lives a little easier, their tables a little fuller. But they don't forget. The revolution taught them that their voices matter, that their hunger can move mountains. Let's linger in a quiet moment, 1807, in a Parisian bakery where Jean buys her bread. The baker, an old man with flour in his beard, remembers the riots too. He was there in 1789, a young apprentice, watching the women march to Versailles. Now, he hands Jean a loaf, warm and crusty, and their eyes meet, a shared understanding, a nod to the past. Jean returns home, where Sophie, now taller, helps set the table. They break the bread, its scent filling the room, a small miracle after years of want. In Orleans and kneads dough, her bakery a haven for her neighbors. In Aix, Claire harvests wheat, her children laughing in the fields. In Brittany, Marie mends nets, her heart steady as the tide. The Bread Riots, as Napoleon's empire grows, become a story told by firelight, a memory carried in the hearts of those who lived them. They're not just riots, they're a testament to the power of ordinary people, especially women, who refuse to let hunger silence them. The revolution, with its guillotines and ideals, has faded, but its roots remain in these women, in their quiet resilience, their stubborn hope. Napoleon's reign will falter in time, his empire crumbling under its own weight, but the legacy of the Bread Riots endures, a reminder that bread, the simplest need, can spark the greatest change. Let's rest here, in the soft glow of this history. Picture Jean sharing bread with Sophie, their smiles a quiet triumph. In Orleans, Anne's oven glows, her hands shaping tomorrow's loaves. In Aix, Claire's fields sway under the sun, promising another harvest. In Brittany, Marie watches the sea, her songs weaving past and present. The Bread Riots, a tale of hunger and heart, settle into the fabric of France, a story as enduring as the land itself. It's 1815, and France is weary, like a traveler after a long journey. Napoleon's brief return, the 100 Days, has ended at Waterloo, and he's exiled again, this time to the distant island of St. Helena. King Louis XVIII, restored to the throne, rules a nation scarred by revolution and war. Paris, with its winding streets and smoky taverns, feels like a city catching its breath. The markets are fuller than they were in the revolution's darkest days, but bread, that eternal heartbeat of the people, remains a quiet worry. For women like Jean, Claire, and Marie, and now Therese, the bread riots are a memory, but one that shapes their lives, like a song they can't forget. Imagine a cool autumn evening in Paris, the air sharp with the scent of fallen leaves. Jean, the seamstress, sits by her window, her needle pausing as she watches the street below. Sophie, her daughter, now a bright-eyed girl of 12, helps fold fabric, her chatter filling the small room. Jean's basket holds a loaf of bread, bought from a bakery that no longer rations its stock. Napoleon's reforms, granaries, price controls, trade routes, have left their mark, even under the new king. But Jean remembers the lean years, the march to Versailles in 1789, the protests of 1795, the weight of hunger in her bones. She tells Sophie these stories, not as tales of glory, but as lessons. When people stand together, even kings must listen. The bread riots, though faded, are not forgotten. They've woven a thread through France's soul, a reminder that the cry for bread can shake empires. Let's drift to Orleans, where and the baker's widow tends her oven, its warmth a constant in her life. Her bakery is a hub for the neighborhood, where women gathered to buy bread and share news. And who once stood with protesters demanding flour, now needs dough with a quiet pride. She remembers the uprisings of 1793, the women's voices rising like a tide. Her customers, some who marched with her, nod as they take their loaves, their eyes carrying the same memory. The bread they buy is better now, less sawdust, more wheat, but it's a victory hard won, paid for in footsteps and shouts. In the south, near Aix-en-Provence, Claire works her fields, her hands deep in the earth. The harvest of 1815 is modest, but enough to feed her family and share with neighbors. Claire, who blocked a miller's cart in the Revolution's hungry years, feels the past in her bones, like the ache of an old wound. She hears talk of the new king, of peace after decades of war, but her world is here, in the rows of wheat, in the bread she bakes for her children. The bread riots taught her that hunger can spark change, that a woman's voice, joined with others, is a force as strong as the wind that bends her crops. In Brittany, Marie stands by the harbor, her nets spread out like wings. The sea is calm today, its waves a soft whisper against the rocks. Her town's market is steady, with fish and bread in equal measure, a balance she couldn't imagine in 1795. Marie, who led women to demand grain from a granary, carries that moment in her heart. She sings as she works, old songs of defiance now softened into lullabies. The sailors speak of Louis XVIII, of taxes and trade, but Marie cares more for the loaf in her basket, its crust warm and familiar. The bread riots, for her, are a story of strength, of women who refused to bow to hunger. Let's linger in 1816, a year of strain. The weather turns cruel, a year without a summer, after a distant volcano's eruption clouds the skies. Crops fail across Europe, and in France, the price of grain creeps up. In towns like Rouen or Nantes, women gather in markets, their voices low but sharp, echoing the protests of decades past. In Nantes, Therese, the baker's wife we met before, joins a small crowd at the town hall. They don't riot, but they stand firm, their baskets empty, their demands clear. Bread, at a price they can afford. Therese, her apron dusted with flour, speaks for the group, her voice steady, her words shaped by the revolution's lessons. The mayor, wary of history, releases grain from the stores, and the women return home, their resolve a quiet fire. These moments, small and scattered, are the Bread Riots' final echoes. They're not the grand marches of 1789, nor the violent uprisings of 1795, but they carry the same spirit, a refusal to let hunger silence the people. Louis XVIII, like Napoleon before him, knows this. His government, though heavy with taxes and royal pride, keeps an eye on the markets, fearing the spark of unrest. Granaries are guarded, but also opened when whispers grow loud. The women who lead these protests, Therese, Louise, and countless others, aren't written in history books, but their footsteps trace the path of change, from Versailles to the smallest village square. By 1820, France settles into a fragile peace. The monarchy endures, but the revolution's shadow looms. The Bread Riots, as a force, have faded, their energy absorbed into the nation's rhythm. Jean, now graying, teaches Sophie to run the sewing shop, their table always set with bread. In Orleans, Anne's bakery thrives, her hands still kneading the dough of survival. In Aix, Claire's children help in the fields, their laughter a harvest of its own. In Brittany, Marie, now a mother, teaches her own daughter the songs of the sea and the strength of standing together. Therese, in Nantes, bakes for her community, her voice still ready to rise if hunger returns. The Bread Riots, from 1789 to these quiet years, are more than protests. They're a testament to the power of ordinary lives. Women, mothers, workers, who marched through mud, who shouted in markets, who stood firm against empty promises, shaped a nation. They forced kings to move, emperors to listen, and governments to act. Their legacy is in every loaf shared, every table set, every child who grows up knowing hunger can be fought. France, as it moves into the 19th century, carries this truth in its bones. Bread is life, and the people's voice is its pulse. Let's rest here, in the soft glow of this history's end. Picture Jean and Sophie, sewing by candlelight, their bread a quiet triumph. In Orleans, Anne's oven warms the night, her loaves a gift to her neighbors. In Aix, Claire's fields sleep under the stars, promising tomorrow's harvest. In Brittany, Marie's songs blend with the waves, her strength a beacon. In Nantes, Therese kneads dough, her heart tied to the women who came before. The Bread Riots, a saga of hunger and hope, settle into France's soul, as enduring as the earth itself. It's 1820, and France is a land of fragile calm, like a field after a storm. King Louis XVIII, restored after Napoleon's fall, rules with a cautious hand, his throne shadowed by the Revolution's memory. Paris, with its bustling markets and smoky chimneys, carries on, its streets no longer ringing with the cries of "do pain," yet still marked by the struggles of the past. The Bread Riots, those desperate marches to Versailles in 1789, the uprisings of 1793 and 1795, the quieter protests of the early 1800s, have faded into stories, told by mothers to daughters, by neighbors over shared loaves. For women like Jean, Claire, and Marie, and Therese, the riots are a quiet fire in their hearts, a reminder of what hunger can spark and what unity can achieve. Imagine a winter morning in Paris, the air crisp, the cobblestones dusted with frost. Jean, the seamstress, now in her late 40s, moves more slowly, her hands stiff from years of needlework. Her daughter Sophie, a young woman now, works beside her, her fingers quick and sure. Their small room is warm with a fire, and on the table sits a loaf of bread, crusty and fragrant, bought from a nearby bakery. The markets are steadier now, thanks to Napoleon's lingering reforms and the monarchy's careful watch on grain supplies. Jean breaks the bread, sharing it with Sophie, and thinks of 1789, when she marched to Versailles with thousands of women, their footsteps a drumbeat of need. She tells Sophie these stories, not to stir anger, but to pass on a truth. The people's voice, even in hunger, can move mountains. In Orleans, Anne's bakery is a cornerstone of her neighborhood, its oven glowing like a heart. And, graying but strong, kneads dough each dawn, her hands tracing the rhythm of survival. She remembers the riots of 1795, when she stood with women in the market square, demanding flour from a government that seemed deaf. Now her customers, some who shared those days, smile as they take their loaves, their baskets heavier than in the Revolution's lean years. Anne doesn't speak of the past often, but when a young girl asks why bread matters so much, she tells of the women who fought for it, their voices louder than hunger's ache. The story is a quiet gift, like an extra crust slipped into a child's hand. Let's drift to Aix-en-Provence, where Claire, now a grandmother, tends her fields with her grown children. The sun warms the earth, and the harvest, though never certain, is enough to fill her barn and share with her village. Claire, who once stood with women to block a miller's cart, carries the bread riots in her bones, a memory of defiance and hope. She tells her grandchildren of those days, her voice soft as she describes the women who refused to let their families starve. The fields around her home are a testament to their victory, bread on the table, a harvest shared. Claire's life is simple, tied to the land, but it's rooted in the Revolution's lessons. Together, ordinary hands can shape a nation. In Brittany, Marie, now in her middle years, works the harbor, her nets heavy with fish. The sea is her constant, its waves a steady song. Her town's market is lively, with bread and fish side by side, a balance she couldn't have dreamed of in 1795 when she led women to demand grain from a granary. Marie's daughter, Elise, helps her now, learning the trade and the songs. Old melodies of defiance turn to lullabies. Marie hears talk of the king, of new taxes, of unrest in distant cities, but her world is here, in the salt air, in the loaf she brings home each night. The bread riots, for her, are a story of strength, of women who stood like rocks against a tide of hunger. In Nantes, Therese, the baker's wife, runs her shop with her husband, their oven a beacon for the town. The protest she led in 1816, when women demanded grain in a year of scarcity, is a memory she holds close, like a worn but cherished shawl. Therese's bakery is a place of warmth, where neighbors gather to buy bread and share news. She tells her young son of the revolution, of the women who marched, their voices carrying the weight of empty tables. The bread she bakes is more than food. It's a promise kept, a legacy of those who fought for it. Let's linger in 1824, as Louis XVIII dies and his brother, Charles X, takes the throne. France is stable, but murmurs of discontent ripple through the provinces. A poor harvest in the east sparks tension, and in a town like Dijon, women gather in the market, their baskets light, their voices sharp with the memory of past riots. They don't storm granaries, but they petition the mayor, their words echoing 1789's cry for bread. The mayor, mindful of history, releases grain, and the women return home, their demands met for now. These moments are small, but they carry the bread riot spirit, a quiet insistence that the people's needs come first. Charles X, more rigid than his brother, rules with a heavier hand, but he cannot ignore the markets. The revolution taught France that hunger is a spark, and the bread riots are its flame. In Paris, Jean hears of these protests, her heart stirring with recognition. She's too old to march now, but she teaches Sophie to listen, to watch, to know the power of a crowd united. In Orleans, Anne gives extra bread to a neighbor whose husband is ill, her generosity a nod to the women who shared flour in leaner times. In Aix, Claire's grandchildren play in the fields, unaware of the hunger their grandmother fought. In Brittany, Marie and Elise mend nets, their songs a bridge between past and present. In Nantes, Therese bakes, her oven a quiet monument to the women who came before. By 1830, France teeters again. Charles X's policies, taxes, censorship, favor for the nobles, ignite unrest, leading to the July Revolution. It's not a bread riot, but it carries the same pulse, the people's voice, rising against a king who forgets their needs. Jean and Claire, Marie and Therese, now older, watch from their corners of France. They don't march, but they nod, recognizing the fire they once carried. The revolution topples Charles X, bringing a new king, Louis Philippe, and a new era. The Bread Riots, as a force, are history now, but their legacy lives in every loaf shared, every market filled, every voice that refuses to be silenced. Let's rest here, in the soft glow of this history's close. Picture Jean and Sophie, sewing by firelight, their bread a quiet victory. In Orleans, Anne's bakery hums, her loaves a gift to her town. In Aix, Claire's fields bloom, her grandchildren's laughter a harvest of hope. In Brittany, Marie and Elise sing, their voices mingling with the sea. In Nantes, Therese kneads dough, her hands carrying the strength of countless women. The Bread Riots, a saga of hunger and heart, are woven into France's soul, as enduring as the rivers that flow through its heart. It's 1830, and France is a land of new beginnings, yet heavy with the weight of its past. The July Revolution has swept away Charles X, replacing him with Louis Philippe, the citizen king, who promises a gentler rule, closer to the people. Paris, with its crowded markets and smoky cafes, pulses with cautious hope, but the scars of the revolution, the guillotines, the marches, the hunger, linger like shadows at dusk. The Bread Riots, from the March to Versailles in 1789 to the protests of 1816, are now stories told by firelight, but for women like Jean, Claire, and Marie and Therese, they are more than tales. They are the rhythm of their lives, the strength in their hands, the fire in their hearts. Imagine a summer evening in Paris, the air warm, the Seine reflecting the last golden light. Jean, now in her 50s, her hair streaked with silver, sits with Sophie in their small sewing shop. Sophie, a young woman of 20, threads a needle with the skill of her mother, her eyes bright with dreams of a better France. Their table holds a loaf of bread, crusty and warm, bought from a market that feels fuller than in the lean years of the Revolution. Jean breaks the bread, her hands steady, and tells Sophie of 1789, when she marched with thousands of women to Versailles, their voices demanding bread, their footsteps shaking a kingdom. Sophie listens, her heart stirred, knowing these stories are her inheritance, a reminder that ordinary women can change the world. In Orleans, Anne's bakery is a beacon, its oven glowing through the dawn. And, older now, her hands slower but sure, kneads dough with the same care she's always given. Her customers, many who stood with her in the protests of 1795, take their loaves with a nod, their shared past a quiet bond. And remembers the market square, the women's voices rising like a storm, demanding flour from a government that seemed blind to their hunger. Now, under Louis Philippe, the markets are steadier, the bread more reliable, but Anne knows this calm is fragile, built on the courage of those who fought for it. She tells her young apprentice, a girl with wide eyes, of the Bread Riots, her voice soft but firm, passing on the lesson. Hunger can spark change, and unity is its flame. Let's drift to Aix-en-Provence, where Claire, now a grandmother, walks her fields with a cane, her grown children and their families working beside her. The sun paints the earth golden, and the harvest, though never certain, fills her barn with enough to share. Claire, who once joined village women to demand flour from a miller, carries the Bread Riots in her heart, a memory of defiance woven into her daily work. She tells her grandchildren of those days, her voice a gentle hum as they gather wheat, describing the women who stood together, their baskets empty, but their resolve full. The fields around her are a testament to their victory, bread on every table, a harvest shared. Claire's life is quiet, rooted in the land, but it echoes the revolution's truth. The people's voice can bend even the mightiest powers. In Brittany, Marie, now a mother of two, sorts fish by the harbor, the sea a constant companion. Her daughter Elise, a spirited teenager, helps mend nets, her laughter mingling with the waves. The market in their town is lively, with bread and fish in abundance, a far cry from 1795, when Marie led women to block a granary's gates. She sings as she works, old songs of defiance now softened into melodies for her children. Marie hears talk of Louis Philippe, of his promises to the people, but she trusts the loaf in her basket more than any king's words. The Bread Riots, for her, are a story of strength, of women who stood like lighthouses against a storm of hunger, their voices guiding the way. In Nantes, Therese, the baker's wife, runs her shop with her husband and son, their oven a warm heart in the town. The protest she led in 1816, when women demanded grain in a year without a summer, is a memory she holds like a worn but cherished book. Therese's Bakery is a gathering place, where neighbors buy bread and share stories of the past. She tells her son of the revolution, of the women who marched, their demands for bread a cry that reached the heavens. The loaves she bakes are more than food. They're a promise, a legacy of those who fought to fill empty tables. Let's linger in 1832, as France faces new challenges. Louis Philippe's rule, though gentler than Charles X's, stirs unrest among workers and Republicans who dream of a truer democracy. A cholera epidemic sweeps through Paris, and a poor harvest in the north tightens the markets. In a town like Lille, women gather in the square, their baskets light, their voices sharp with the memory of past riots. They don't march to a palace, but they stand before the mayor's house, demanding grain at prices they can afford. A woman named Pauline, a weaver with hands rough from looms, speaks for the group, her words echoing the women of Versailles. The mayor, fearing a spark, releases flour from the town's stores, and the women return home, their baskets heavier, their hearts steady. These small protests, scattered across France, are the Bread Riots' final whispers. They're not the grand uprisings of 1789 or 1795, but they carry the same pulse, a refusal to let hunger silence the people. Louis Philippe, like Napoleon and Louis XVIII before him, knows this. His government watches the markets, opens granaries, and punishes hoarders, mindful of the revolution's lessons. Pauline, like Jean, Claire, and Marie and Therese, is not in history's pages, but her voice, joined with others, keeps the flame alive. By 1840, France moves toward a new era. Louis Philippe's reign, though called the bourgeois monarchy, struggles to balance the needs of the people with the demands of progress. The Bread Riots, as a force, have faded, their energy woven into the nation's fabric. Jean, now old, watches Sophie run the sewing shop, her pride a quiet glow. In Orleans, Anne's bakery passes to her apprentice, her legacy in every loaf. In Aix, Claire rests in her fields, her grandchildren carrying on her work. In Brittany, Marie and Elise fish the sea, their songs a bridge to the past. In Nantes, Therese's son learns to bake, his hands shaped by his mother's stories. The Bread Riots, from 1789 to these quiet years, are a testament to the power of ordinary women, mothers, workers, neighbors, who refused to let hunger win. They marched, they shouted, they stood firm, and their voices changed a nation. From Versailles to village squares, they forced kings, emperors, and governments to listen. Their legacy is in every loaf shared, every market filled, every child who grows up knowing that hunger can be fought, and unity is its strength. Let's rest here, in the soft glow of this history's close. Picture Jean and Sophie, sewing by firelight, their bread a quiet triumph. In Orleans, Anne's oven warms the night, her loaves a gift. In Aix, Claire's fields sleep under the stars, her harvest shared. In Brittany, Marie and Elise sing, their voices one with the sea. In Nantes, Therese's bakery hums, her son kneading dough with her heart. The Bread Riots, a saga of hunger and hope, are woven into France's soul, as enduring as the rivers that cradle its lands. It's 1840, and France is a land of contrasts, poised between progress and unease. Louis Philippe, the citizen king, rules a nation that calls itself a monarchy but dreams of democracy. Paris hums with the clatter of new factories, the chatter of cafes, and the hopes of a growing middle class, But for the poor, workers, artisans, mothers, the struggle for bread remains a quiet undercurrent. The Bread Riots, from the March to Versailles in 1789 to the protests of the 1820s, are now stories told by grandmothers, their voices soft but heavy with meaning. For women like Jean, Claire, and Marie, Therese, and Pauline, the riots are not just history. They are the strength in their hands, the resolve in their hearts, the memory of a time when hunger sparked change. Imagine a spring morning in Paris, the air soft with the scent of lilacs. Jean, now in her late 50s, her hands gnarled from years of sewing, sits by her window, watching the street come alive. Sophie, her daughter, now a skilled seamstress in her mid-20s, runs their shop, her laughter a bright note in their small world. Their table holds a loaf of bread, crusty and warm, bought from a market that feels fuller than in the Revolution's lean years. Jean breaks the bread, her movements slow but sure, and thinks of 1789, when she marched to Versailles, her voice joined with thousands of women demanding bread. She tells Sophie these stories, her words a gentle hum, passing on a truth. The people's need, when united, can shake even a king's throne. In Orleans, Anne's bakery is a haven, its oven glowing through the dawn. And, now nearing 60, has passed much of her work to her apprentice, a young woman named Claire. Not our Claire for Mike's, but another, named for the hope of spring. And watches her knead dough, her hands steady, and remembers 1795, when she stood with women in the market square, their voices demanding flour from a government blind to their hunger. The bread Claire bakes is better now, made with wheat more often than rye, and knows its price was paid in the footsteps of those who marched. She tells Claire of the Bread Riots, her voice a soft thread, weaving the past into the present, a reminder that every loaf is a victory. Let's drift to Aix-en-Provence, where Claire, our Claire, now a grandmother in her 60s, rests in the shade of her fields. Her children and grandchildren work the land, their laughter mingling with the rustle of wheat. The harvest is steady, thanks to better roads and markets, but Claire remembers the lean years, when she joined village women to demand flour from a miller's cart. She tells her grandchildren these stories, her voice like the wind through the fields, describing the women who stood together, their baskets empty, but their hearts full. The bread they bake, shared with neighbors, is a testament to those days, a legacy of resilience rooted in the earth. In Brittany, Marie, now in her late 40s, tends the harbor, her nets heavy with fish. Her daughter Elise, a young woman with her mother's spirit, helps sell their catch at the market, where bread and fish sit side by side. Marie remembers 1795, when she led women to block a granary's gates, their voices rising above hunger's ache. She sings as she works, old songs of defiance, now softened into melodies for Elise, who listens with wide eyes. The market is fuller now, the bread more reliable, but Marie knows its cost. The marches, the protests, the women who refuse to be silenced. She teaches Elise these stories, her voice a tide that carries the past into the future. In Nantes, Therese, the baker's wife, now in her 50s, runs her shop with her son, who has learned to bake with her care. The protests she led in 1816, when women demanded grain in a year of scarcity, is a memory she holds like a warm loaf, cherished and sustaining. Therese's bakery is a gathering place, where neighbors share news and bread, their voices weaving a community. She tells her son of the revolution, of the women who marched, their demands for bread a cry that reached the stars. The loaves she bakes are a promise, a legacy of those who fought for full tables. Let's linger in 1846, as France faces new strains. Louis Philippe's reign, though stable, is marred by growing unrest. Workers demand rights, Republicans dream of revolution, and the poor still feel the pinch of rising prices. A series of bad harvests, worsened by potato blight and drought, tightens the markets. In a town like Rouen, Women gather in the square, their baskets light, their voices sharp with the memory of past riots. A woman named Madeline, a laundress with hands red from work, speaks for the group, her words echoing the women of 1789. They don't storm granaries, but they stand before the mayor's house, demanding bread at prices they can afford. The mayor, wary of history, releases flour, and the women return home, their baskets heavier, their resolve a quiet flame. These small protests, scattered across France, are the Bread Riots' final echoes. They're not the grand marches of 1789 or the uprisings of 1795, but they carry the same spirit, a refusal to let hunger silence the people. Louis Philippe's government, like those before it, watches the markets, opens granaries, and curbs speculators, mindful of the revolution's lessons. Madeline, like Jean, Claire, and Marie, Therese, and Pauline, is not in history's pages, but her voice, joined with others, keeps the fire alive. By 1848, France teeters on the edge of another revolution. Economic hardship, political unrest, and the people's dreams of a truer republic ignite the February Revolution, toppling Louis Philippe and ushering in the Second Republic. It's not a bread riot, but it carries the same pulse, the people's voice, rising against a system that forgets their needs. Jean and Claire, Marie and Therese, now old, watch from their corners of France. They don't march, but they nod, recognizing the fire they once carried. Madeline in Rouen joins the crowds, her voice a new thread in the tapestry of change. The Bread Riots, from 1789 to these final years, are a testament to the power of ordinary women, mothers, workers, neighbors, who refused to let hunger win. They marched through mud, shouted in markets, stood firm against empty promises, and their voices shaped a nation. From Versailles to village squares, they forced kings, emperors, and governments to listen. Their legacy is in every loaf shared, every market filled, every child who grows up knowing that hunger can be fought, and unity is its strength. Let's rest here, in the soft glow of this history's close. Picture Jean and Sophie, sewing by firelight, their bread a quiet triumph. In Orleans, Anne's apprentice bakes, her oven a beacon. In Aix, Claire's fields bloom, her grandchildren's laughter a harvest of hope. In Brittany, Marie and Elise sing, their voices one with the sea. In Nantes, Therese's son kneads dough, his hands carrying her heart. In Rouen, Madeline shares bread with her neighbors, her voice a new echo. The Bread Riots, a saga of hunger and heart, are woven into France's soul, as enduring as the stars above its lands. It's 1848, and France is once again a land reborn, yet tethered to its past. The February Revolution has swept away Louis Philippe, ushering in the Second Republic, a fragile dream of democracy. Paris, with its crowded streets and hopeful banners, hums with the promise of change, but the scars of the past, the guillotines, the marches, the hunger, linger like mist over the Seine. The Bread Riots, from the March to Versailles in 1789 to the protests of 1846, are now tales told by grandmothers, their voices soft but heavy with meaning. For women like Jean, Claire, and Marie, Therese, and Madeline, the riots are not just history. They are the strength in their bones, the resolve in their hearts, the memory of a time when hunger sparked a nation's awakening. Imagine a crisp autumn evening in Paris, the air sharp with the scent of wood smoke. Jean, now in her early 60s, her hands slowed by age, sits by the fire in her sewing shop. Sophie, her daughter, now a confident woman in her late 20s, runs the business with a steady hand, her needle flashing in the candlelight. Their table holds a loaf of bread, crusty and warm, bought from a market that feels fuller than in the Revolution's lean years. Jean breaks the bread, her movements deliberate, and thinks of 1789, when she marched to Versailles, her voice joined with thousands of women demanding bread. She tells Sophie these stories, her voice a gentle hum, passing on a truth. The people's need, when united, can topple kings and shape republics. In Orleans, Anne's bakery is now in the hands of her apprentice, Claire, who carries her mentor's name and spirit. And, nearing 70, rests by the oven, her hands too frail to knead, but her heart still tied to the bread she once baked. She remembers 1795, when she stood with women in the market square, their voices demanding flour from a government deaf to their hunger. Claire, the young baker, listens as and tells of the bread riots, her words a soft thread weaving past into present. The loaves Claire bakes are better now, made with wheat and care, and knows their price was paid in the footsteps of those who marched. She watches Claire serve their neighbors, her bakery a quiet monument to the women who fought for full tables. Let's drift to Aix-en-Provence, where Claire, our Claire, now in her late 60s, sits under an olive tree, her fields stretching golden around her. Her grandchildren, grown and strong, work the land, their laughter a harvest of its own. Claire, who once joined village women to demand flour from a miller's cart, carries the bread riots in her heart, a memory of defiance and hope. She tells her grandchildren these stories, her voice like the rustle of leaves, describing the women who stood together, their baskets empty, but their resolve full. The bread they bake, shared with neighbors, is a testament to those days, a legacy of resilience rooted in the earth. In Brittany, Marie, now in her early 50s, tends the harbor, her nets heavy with fish. Her daughter Elise, a young woman in her 20s, sells their catch at the market, where bread and fish sit side by side. Marie remembers 1795, when she led women to block a granary's gates, their voices rising above hunger's ache. She sings as she works, old songs of defiance, now softened into melodies for Elise, who listens with pride. The market is fuller now, the bread more reliable, but Marie knows its cost. The marches, the protests, the women who refuse to be silenced. She teaches Elise these stories, her voice a tide that carries the past into the future. In Nantes, Therese, now in her late 50s, runs her bakery with her son, who has inherited her skill and heart. The protests she led in 1816, when women demanded grain in a year of scarcity, is a memory she holds like a warm loaf, cherished and sustaining. Therese's bakery is a gathering place, where neighbors share news and bread, their voices weaving a community. She tells her son of the revolution, of the women who marched, their demands for bread a cry that reached the heavens. The loaves she bakes are a promise, a legacy of those who fought for full tables. Let's linger in 1851 as the Second Republic falters. Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, nephew of the great Napoleon, seizes power in a coup, declaring himself president and soon Emperor Napoleon III. France, weary of revolutions, accepts his rule, hoping for stability. But the markets remain a pulse of the people's needs. A poor harvest in the West sparks tension, and in a town like Le Mans, women gather in the square, their baskets light, their voices sharp with a memory of past riots. A woman named Rose, a seamstress with hands like jeans, speaks for the group, her words echoing the women of 1789. They don't storm granaries, but they stand before the mayor's house, demanding bread at prices they can afford. The mayor, wary of history, releases flour, and the women return home, their baskets heavier, their resolve a quiet flame. These small protests, scattered across France, are the bread riots' final whispers. They're not the grand marches of 1789 or the uprisings of 1795, but they carry the same spirit, a refusal to let hunger silence the people. Napoleon III, like his uncle, knows this. His government watches the markets, opens granaries, and curbs speculators, mindful of the revolution's lessons. Rose, like Jean, Claire, and Marie, Therese, and Madeleine, is not in history's pages, but her voice, joined with others, keeps the fire alive. By 1860, France is changing. Napoleon III's empire brings railroads, factories, and a new prosperity, but the poor still feel the pinch of progress. The bread riots, as a force, have faded, their energy woven into the nation's fabric. Jean, now in her twilight years, watches Sophie raise her own children, their table always set with bread. In Orleans and rests her legacy in Claire's bakery, where loaves feed a new generation. In Aix, Claire's fields bloom, her great-grandchildren playing in the wheat. In Brittany, Marie and Elise fish the sea, their songs a bridge to the past. In Nantes, Therese's son runs the bakery, his hands shaped by his mother's stories. In Le Mans, Rose sews, her voice ready to rise if hunger returns. The Bread Riots, from 1789 to these quiet years, are a testament to the power of ordinary women, mothers, workers, neighbors, who refuse to let hunger win. They marched through mud, shouted in markets, stood firm against empty promises, and their voices shaped a nation. From Versailles to village squares, they forced kings, emperors, and governments to listen. Their legacy is in every loaf shared, every market filled, every child who grows up knowing that hunger can be fought and unity is its strength. Let's rest here, in the soft glow of this history's close. Picture Jean and Sophie sharing bread with Sophie's children, their laughter a quiet triumph. In Orleans, Claire's oven warms the night, her loaves a gift. In Aix, Claire's fields sleep under the stars, her harvest shared. In Brittany, Marie and Elise sing, their voices one with the sea. In Nantes, Therese's son kneads dough, his heart carrying her strength. In Le Mans, Rose sews, her resolve a new echo. The Bread Riots, a saga of hunger and heart, are woven into France's soul, as enduring as the rivers that cradle its lands. It's 1860, and France is a land of gleaming progress and hidden struggles. Napoleon III, once Louis Napoleon, rules as emperor, his second empire a blend of grandeur and control. Paris is transforming, its narrow streets giving way to wide boulevards, its markets bustling with the fruits of railroads and trade. Yet, for the poor, workers in new factories, artisans in cramped workshops, mothers in crowded tenements, the price of bread remains a quiet worry, a thread tying them to the revolution's hungry years. The Bread Riots, from the March to Versailles in 1789 to the protests of 1851, are now tales told by grandmothers, their voices soft but heavy with meaning. For women like Jean, Claire, and Marie, Therese, Madeline, and Rose, the riots are not just history. They are the strength in their hands, the resolve in their hearts, the memory of a time when hunger sparked a nation's awakening. Imagine a crisp winter morning in Paris, the air sharp with frost, the Seine glinting under a pale sun. Jean, now in her early 70s, her hands too frail for sewing, sits by the fire in her daughter Sophie's home. Sophie, now in her 30s, runs the sewing shop with her own daughter, Louise, a bright-eyed girl of 10. Their table holds a loaf of bread, crusty and warm, bought from a market that feels fuller than in the Revolution's lean years. Jean breaks the bread, her movements slow, and thinks of 1789, when she marched to Versailles, her voice joined with thousands of women demanding bread. She tells Louise these stories, her voice a gentle hum, passing on a truth: the people's need, when united, can shake even an emperor's throne. In Orleans, Claire, the young baker who inherited Anne's bakery, tends the oven, its glow a beacon in the dawn. And, now in her late 70s, rests nearby, her eyes bright despite her years. She watches Claire knead dough, her hands swift and sure, and remembers 1795, when she stood with women in the market square, their voices demanding flour from a government blind to their hunger. Claire listens as and tells of the Bread Riots, her words a soft thread weaving past into present. The loaves Claire bakes are better now, made with wheat and care, and knows their price was paid in the footsteps of those who marched. She smiles as Claire serves their neighbors, the bakery a quiet monument to the women who fought for full tables. Let's drift to Aix-en-Provence, where Claire, our Claire, now in her early 70s, rests under the shade of an olive tree, her fields stretching golden around her. Her great-grandchildren, laughing as they play in the wheat, are her harvest now. Claire, who once joined village women to demand flour from a miller's cart, carries the Bread Riots in her heart, a memory of defiance and hope. She tells her great-grandchildren these stories, her voice like the rustle of leaves, describing the women who stood together, their baskets empty, but their resolve full. The bread they bake, shared with neighbors, is a testament to those days, a legacy of resilience rooted in the earth. In Brittany, Marie, now in her late 50s, tends a harbor, her nets heavy with fish. Her daughter Elise, now married and a mother herself, sells their catch at the market, where bread and fish sit side by side. Marie remembers 1795, when she led women to block a granary's gates, their voices rising above hunger's ache. She sings as she works, old songs of defiance now softened into melodies for her grandchildren, who listen with wide eyes. The market is fuller now, the bread more reliable, but Marie knows its cost. The marches, the protests, the women who refuse to be silenced. She teaches her grandchildren these stories, her voice a tide that carries the past into the future. In Nantes, Therese, now in her early 60s, runs her bakery with her son and his young family. The protests she led in 1816, when women demanded grain in a year of scarcity, is a memory she holds like a warm loaf, cherished and sustaining. Therese's bakery is a gathering place, where neighbors share news and bread, their voices weaving a community. She tells her grandchildren of the revolution, of the women who marched, their demands for bread a cry that reached the heavens. The loaves she bakes are a promise, a legacy of those who fought for full tables. In Le Mans, Rose, the seamstress who led a protest in 1851, is now in her 40s, her hands still nimble as she sews. Her daughter, Juliette, helps in the shop, her eyes bright with the stories Rose tells of the women who demanded bread, their voices echoing 1789. The market in Le Mans is steady, but Rose remembers the lean years, the hunger that drove her to stand with others before the mayor's house. She teaches Juliette these stories, her voice a quiet fire, passing on the lesson that unity is stronger than want. Let's linger in 1867, as Napoleon III's empire shines at its peak. Paris hosts a grand universal exposition showcasing France's progress, railroads, factories, art. But in the provinces, a wet summer damages crops, and the price of bread creeps up. In a town like Brest, women gather in the market, their baskets light, their voices sharp with the memory of past riots. A woman named Isabelle, a fishwife with hands like Marie's, speaks for the group, her words echoing the women of Versailles. They don't storm granaries, but they stand before the town hall, demanding flour at prices they can afford. The mayor, wary of history, releases grain, and the women return home, their baskets heavier, their resolve a quiet flame. These small protests, scattered across France, are the Bread Riots' final whispers. They're not the grand marches of 1789 or the uprisings of 1795, but they carry the same spirit, a refusal to let hunger silence the people. Napoleon III, like his predecessors, knows this. His government watches the markets, opens granaries, and curbs speculators, mindful of the revolution's lessons. Isabelle, like Jean, Claire, and Marie, Therese, Madeleine, and Rose, is not in history's pages, but her voice, joined with others, keeps the fire alive. By 1870, France faces new turmoil. Napoleon III's empire falls after defeat in the Franco-Prussian War, giving way to the Third Republic. The markets falter, and in cities like Lyon, women like Isabelle gather, their voices echoing the past. The Bread Riots, as a force, have faded, their energy woven into the nation's fabric. Jean, now in her twilight years, rests with Sophie's family, their table always set with bread. In Orleans, Claire's bakery thrives, and's legacy in every loaf. In Aix, Claire's great-grandchildren work the fields, her stories their harvest. In Brittany, Marie's grandchildren fish the sea, her songs their guide. In Nantes, Therese's grandchildren bake, their hands shaped by her heart. In Le Mans, Rose and Juliette sew, their resolve a new echo. In Brest, Isabelle shares fish and bread, her voice a final note. The Bread Riots, from 1789 to these quiet years, are a testament to the power of ordinary women, mothers, workers, neighbors, who refused to let hunger win. They marched through mud, shouted in markets, stood firm against empty promises, and their voices shaped a nation. From Versailles to village squares, they forced kings, emperors, and governments to listen. Their legacy is in every loaf shared, every market filled, every child who grows up knowing that hunger can be fought and unity is its strength. Let's rest here, in the soft glow of this history's close. It's 1880, and France is a land of steady growth, its Third Republic taking root after decades of upheaval. Paris, with its grand boulevards and bustling cafes, shines as a beacon of progress, its markets filled with the fruits of railroads and trade. Yet for the poor, workers in factories, artisans in workshops, mothers in crowded tenements, the price of bread remains a quiet concern, a thread tying them to the revolution's hungry years. The Bread Riots, from the March to Versailles in 1789 to the protests of 1871, are now tales told by great-grandmothers, their voices soft but heavy with meaning. For women like Jean, Claire, and Marie, Therese, Madeline, Rose, Isabel, and Elise, the riots are not just history. They are the strength in their bones, the resolve in their hearts, the memory of a time when hunger sparked a nation's awakening. Imagine a cool autumn evening in Paris, the air crisp with the scent of fallen leaves. Jean, now in her early 80s, her hands too frail for sewing, rests by the fire in Sophie's home. Sophie, now in her late 40s, runs the sewing shop with her daughter Louise, a young woman of 20. Their table holds a loaf of bread, crusty and warm, bought from a market that feels fuller than in the Revolution's lean years. Jean breaks the bread, her movements slow, and thinks of 1789, when she marched to Versailles, her voice joined with thousands of women demanding bread. She tells Louise these stories, her voice a gentle hum, passing on a truth. The people's need, when united, can shape republics and topple empires. In Orleans, Claire, the young baker who inherited Anne's bakery, tends the oven, its glow a beacon in the dawn. And, now in her late 80s, rests nearby, her eyes bright with memories. She watches Claire knead dough, her hands swift, and remembers 1795, when she stood with women in the market square, their voices demanding flour from a government blind to their hunger. Claire listens as and tells of the bread riots, her words a soft thread weaving past into present. The loaves Claire bakes are better now, made with wheat and care, and knows their price was paid in the footsteps of those who marched. She smiles as Claire serves their neighbors, the bakery a quiet monument to the women who fought for full tables. Let's drift to Aix-en-Provence, where Claire, our Claire, now in her early 80s, sits under an olive tree, her fields stretching golden around her. Her great-grandchildren, full of laughter, work the land, their voices a harvest of joy. Claire, who once joined village women to demand flour from a miller's cart, carries the bread riots in her heart, a memory of defiance and hope. She tells her great-grandchildren these stories, her voice like the rustle of wheat, describing the women who stood together, their baskets empty, but their resolve full. The bread they bake, shared with neighbors, is a testament to those days, a legacy of resilience rooted in the earth. In Brittany, Marie, now in her late 60s, tends the harbor, her nets heavy with fish. Her daughter Elise, now a mother, sells their catch at the market, where bread and fish sit side by side. Marie remembers 1795, when she led women to block a granary's gates, their voices rising above hunger's ache. She sings as she works, old songs of defiance, now softened into melodies for her grandchildren, who listen with wide eyes. The market is fuller now, the bread more reliable, but Marie knows its cost. The marches, the protests, the women who refuse to be silenced. She teaches her grandchildren these stories, her voice a tide that carries the past into the future. In Nantes, Therese, now in her early 70s, oversees her bakery, where her son and his family carry on her work. The protests she led in 1816, when women demanded grain in a year of scarcity, is a memory she holds like a warm loaf, cherished and sustaining. Therese Bakery is a gathering place where neighbors share news and bread, their voices weaving a community. She tells her grandchildren of the revolution, of the women who marched, their demands for bread a cry that reached the heavens. The loaves they bake are a promise, a legacy of those who fought for full tables. In Le Mans, Rose, now in her late 50s, sews with her daughter Juliette, now a skilled seamstress. Rose remembers 1851, when she led a protest for bread, her voice echoing the women of 1789. The market in Le Mans is steady, but Rose tells Juliette these stories, her voice a quiet fire, passing on the lesson that unity is stronger than want. In Brest, Isabelle, now in her 50s, sorts fish with her daughter Anne-Marie, a young woman with her mother's spirit. Isabelle remembers 1867, when she led a protest for bread, her voice a tide that shifted history. She teaches Anne-Marie these stories, her voice a beacon in the harbor's mist. In Paris, Elise, the laundress who joined the Paris Commune in 1871, is now in her 40s, her hands red from work. Her daughter, Camille, helps with the washing, listening to her mother's tales of the women who demanded bread and justice. The market near the Bastille is lively, but Elise knows its cost, the hunger that drove her to stand with others. She teaches Camille these stories, her voice a quiet flame, passing on the lesson that the people's voice can change the world. Let's linger in 1885 as the Third Republic strengthens. A cold winter and a poor harvest in the north spark tension, and in a town like Amiens, women gather in the market, their baskets light, their voices sharp with the memory of past riots. A woman named Louise, not our Louise from Paris, but another, a weaver with hands rough from looms, speaks for the group, her words echoing the women of Versailles. They don't storm granaries, but they stand before the town hall, demanding flour at prices they can afford. The mayor, wary of history, releases grain, and the women return home, their baskets heavier, their resolve a quiet flame. These small protests, scattered across France, are the Bread Riots' final whispers. They're not the grand marches of 1789 or the uprisings of 1795, but they carry the same spirit, a refusal to let hunger silence the people. The Third Republic, mindful of the revolution's lessons, watches the markets, opens granaries, and curbs speculators. Louise, like Jean, Claire, and Marie, Therese, Madeline, Rose, Isabelle, and Elise, is not in history's pages, but her voice, joined with others, keeps the fire alive. By 1890, France is a nation of progress, its markets brimming with bread, fruit, and hope. The Bread Riots, as a force, have faded, their energy woven into the nation's fabric. Jean, now gone, lives on in Sophie's family, their table always set with bread. In Orleans, Claire's bakery thrives, Anne's legacy in every loaf. In Aix, Claire's great-grandchildren work the fields, her stories their harvest. In Brittany, Marie's grandchildren fish the sea, her songs their guide. In Nantes, Therese's grandchildren bake, their hands shaped by her heart. In Le Mans, Rose and Juliette sew, their resolve enduring. In Brest, Isabelle and Anne-Marie share fish and bread, their voices a final note. In Paris, Elise and Camille wash clothes, their hearts tied to the past. In Amiens, Louise weaves, her voice a new echo. The Bread Riots, from 1789 to these quiet years, are It's 1890, and France is a land of steady progress, its Third Republic a beacon of stability after a century of upheaval. Paris, with its grand boulevards, glittering cafes, and bustling markets, shines as a symbol of modernity, its stalls brimming with bread, fruit, and the promise of a new era. Yet, for the poor, workers in factories, artisans in workshops, mothers in crowded tenements, the price of bread remains a quiet concern, a thread tying them to the revolution's hungry years. The Bread Riots, from the march to Versailles in 1789 to the protests of 1885, are now tales told by great-grandmothers, their voices soft but heavy with meaning. For women like Sophie, Claire, Marie, Therese, Rose, Isabel, Elise, and Louise. The riots are not just history. They are the strength in their bones, the resolve in their hearts, the memory of a time when hunger sparked a nation's awakening. Imagine a crisp autumn morning in Paris, the air sharp with the scent of fallen leaves. Sophie, now in her mid-50s, runs the sewing shop with her daughter Louise, a spirited woman in her late 20s. Jean, Sophie's mother, has passed on, but her stories of 1789, when she marched to Versailles with thousands of women demanding bread, live in Sophie's heart. Their table holds a loaf of bread, crusty and warm, bought from a market that feels fuller than in the Revolution's lean years. Sophie breaks the bread, her movement steady, and tells Louise these stories, her voice a gentle hum, passing on a truth. The people's need, when united, can shape republics and topple empires. In Orleans, Claire, the young baker who inherited Anne's bakery, tends the oven, its glow a beacon in the dawn. And now gone, lives on in Claire's work, her stories of 1795, when she stood with women in the market square demanding flour, woven into every loaf. Claire, now in her 40s, kneads dough with care, her hands swift, and tells her own daughter, and, of the bread riots, her words a soft thread weaving past into present. The loaves she bakes are better now, made with wheat and love, but Claire knows their price was paid in the footsteps of those who marched. She smiles as she serves her neighbors, the bakery a quiet monument to the women who fought for full tables. Let's drift to Aix-en-Provence, where Claire, our Claire, has passed on, but her fields stretch golden under the care of her great-grandchildren. Her stories of the bread riots, of the women who demanded flour from a miller's cart, live on in her family, told by her daughter, now a grandmother herself. The great-grandchildren, laughing as they work the land, hear these tales, their voices mingling with the rustle of wheat. The bread they bake, shared with neighbors, is a testament to those days, a legacy of resilience rooted in the earth. In Brittany, Marie, now in her early 70s, rests by the harbor, her nets tended by her daughter Elise and her grandchildren. Elise, now in her 40s, sells their catch at the market, where bread and fish sit side by side. Marie remembers 1795, when she led women to block a granary's gates, their voices rising above hunger's ache. She sings as she watches the sea, old songs of defiance, now softened into melodies for her grandchildren, who listen with wide eyes. The market is fuller now, the bread more reliable, but Marie knows its cost. The marches, the protests, the women who refuse to be silenced. She teaches her grandchildren these stories, her voice a tide that carries the past into the future. In Nantes, Therese, now in her late 70s, oversees her bakery, where her son and his family carry on her work. The protests she led in 1816, when women demanded grain in a year of scarcity, is a memory she holds like a warm loaf, cherished and sustaining. Therese's bakery is a gathering place, where neighbors share news and bread, their voices weaving a community. She tells her great-grandchildren of the revolution, of the women who marched, their demands for bread a cry that reached the heavens. The loaves they bake are a promise, a legacy of those who fought for full tables. In Le Mans, Rose, now in her 60s, sews with her daughter Juliette, now a skilled seamstress in her 30s. Rose remembers 1851, when she led a protest for bread, her voice echoing the women of 1789. The market in Le Mans is steady, but Rose tells Juliette these stories, her voice a quiet fire, passing on a lesson that unity is stronger than want. In Brest, Isabel, now in her late 50s, sorts fish with her daughter Anne-Marie, now a young mother. Isabel remembers 1867, when she led a protest for bread, her voice a tide that shifted history. She teaches Anne-Marie these stories, her voice a beacon in the harbor's mist. In Paris, Elise, now in her 50s, washes clothes with her daughter Camille, now in her 20s. Elise remembers 1871, when she joined the Paris Commune, her voice rising with others for bread and justice. The market near the Bastille is lively, but Elise knows its cost. the hunger that drove her to stand with others. She teaches Camille these stories, her voice a quiet flame, passing on the lesson that the people's voice can change the world. In Amiens, Louise, the weaver who led a protest in 1885, is now in her 40s, her hands still swift on the loom. Her daughter, Marie-Louise, listens to her mother's tales of the women who demanded bread, their voices a tide that shaped history. Let's linger in 1895 as the Third Republic thrives. A wet spring and a poor harvest in the east spark tension, and in a town like Reims, women gather in the market, their baskets light, their voices sharp with the memory of past riots. A woman named Charlotte, a baker's daughter with hands dusted with flour, speaks for the group, her words echoing the women of Versailles. They don't storm granaries, but they stand before the town hall, demanding flour at prices they can afford. The mayor, wary of history, releases grain, and the women return home, their baskets heavier, their resolve a quiet flame. These small protests, scattered across France, are the Bread Riots' final whispers. They're not the grand marches of 1789 or the uprisings of 1795, but they carry the same spirit, a refusal to let hunger silence the people. The Third Republic, mindful of the revolution's lessons, watches the markets, opens granaries, and curbs speculators. Charlotte, like Sophie, Claire, Marie, Therese, Rose, Isabelle, Elise, and Louise, is not in history's pages, but her voice, joined with others, keeps the fire alive. By 1900, France stands at the dawn of a new century, its markets brimming with bread, fruit, and hope. The Bread Riots, as a force, have faded, their energy woven into the nation's fabric. Sophie's family shares bread with Louise's children, their laughter a quiet triumph. In Orleans, Claire's bakery thrives.